Good afternoon everyone, and thanks very much for joining this webinar. As I'm sure you know, from September 2016, reception children will be assessed as they enter school, and this is going to be a requirement of the Department for Education. The department, however, has said that they would like as many schools as possible to start from this coming September, and working towards that they have approved 6 suppliers, and GL assessment is one of those 6 suppliers. The idea of the baseline is that this will be the starting point for tracking progress through the whole of primary, and I think you will be getting a communication, if you haven't already, from the DFE encouraging you to start this coming September when our baseline will be ready. The approach we've taken is to apply the rigour that we use when we're developing our very big test series. You may know our progress in English, progress in maths, and possibly our cognitive abilities test. These are fully standardised tests and generally cover age ranges from about 5 or 6 up to 14. So we've tried to apply that sort of approach to baseline, but at the same time understand that the children who are being assessed are very, very young, that they need not to be aware that an assessment is taking place, and the most important thing is that the teacher will get some additional information from the process that will help them support those children as they start in reception. Also, it was a requirement of the department that not just teachers would be administering the baseline assessment, that teaching assistants could also contribute towards this process and learn more about the individual students in this way. So that's the approach we've taken. Just in case you don't know who GL assessment is, we've been producing assessments for over 30 years now. We work with leading research institutions across the UK, and we are an official provider to the National Association of Head Teachers. We have a range of early years assessments, including the Welcome Toolkit, some of you may know, the York Assessment of Reading for Comprehension, and we've been able to draw on material from a range of these assessments to create our baseline. So, as I say, we've drawn on some material that we had already developed to a very, very high standard with experts in the field. We decided that we would focus on language and communication, literacy and mathematics, and we brought these three parts together to give you the scale score which the GFE is looking for. It will produce that very reliably, but also to give you an idea in each of those areas how the children have done in the assessment, and that will give you some additional information as you start teaching them. So we have taken a slightly different approach to some of the other suppliers, and we decided that because tablets are very widely used in schools now, that we would produce a tablet-based assessment, and this would perhaps be more engaging for the children. We've actually delivered it on 2 tablets, so there's one that the teacher uses, and that very much sort of controls the pace of the assessment, and then the student has their own tablet and they can respond either by touching the tablet or by giving a spoken response to their teacher. Everything is picture-based. The whole assessment can be done, we think, within 20 to 25 minutes. We actually, in our trialling in September, we had a longer version, so we're not absolutely certain of the time, but we think it's between 20 and 25 minutes, and it can be broken down into 2 or 3 sessions, whichever is most suitable for you. We're also producing some optional assessments which will allow you to measure progress to the end of reception, so there'll be a further literacy and a further maths assessment for the end of reception, and that will be going into schools in June of this year so that we can collect data. So as I said, there are 3 parts: language and communication, The literacy is based on 2 short assessments for phoneme awareness and a very short mathematics test as well, which focuses mostly on number, as you can imagine. We've just got a couple of examples so you know the sort of thing we're talking about. And the little characters you're looking at on the screen now, those characters are the theme for Baseline, and they go through both the product and also a lot of the marketing that you will see around Baseline. Features the characters and the little dog as well. So in this particular question here, if you look at the screen, you can see on the right-hand teacher's tablet, there's a little speaker icon, and that's the button for controlling the audio, because everything is supported with audio. You can also see on the teacher's tablet that the teacher has confirmation about the student they are connected to, because the 2 tablets have to be synchronized. So the teacher can see that she is assessing the right student. And for this one, the audio gives the question and the child gives a spoken response, because this is one of the expression questions. And you can also see on the teacher's tablet there's a correct and an incorrect, and the teacher marks this particular question. And that's not the case for all. We'll look at some other alternatives. So in the phoneme awareness section, here, this is actually an example question, and you can see again on the teacher's tablet there's a little mortarboard, and that indicates that this is a practice or a training question. And with this particular question, if we move on, this is a similar one. Again, this requires the pupil to give a spoken response, and again the teacher will mark it correct or incorrect. So in this particular question, you are seeing if the child can remove the p sound in parrot and give you parrot as the answer. The other phoneme awareness assessment is done without picture support, so we just have this ear, which is there to encourage the children to listen. Again, this is something where the teacher records the response is correct or incorrect. In the maths questions, again, there are a variety of questions. In this one, you can see that the buttons have a P and a Q, so the question is broken down into 2 parts. So there's a prompt, and you play that to the student, and you give them time to absorb that piece of information. It is a short piece of information, and then when you're sure that they have absorbed that, you press the Q, and that gives you the actual task. So in this one, the pupil has to select 5 big fish, and they do that by tapping on the tablet, and that records automatically. And I think you can just see here that some of the fish have a blue highlight behind them. So as the pupil selects the fish, the highlight appears on the pupil's tablet and on the teacher's tablet, so the teacher can see exactly what the student has selected. And then when the teacher swipes to the next screen, that response is recorded and it is scored automatically by the program. So we've talked a little bit about the scale score which the Department for Education requires, and that is a single number that will bring together all 3 parts of this particular assessment. And there will be a variety of different ways of scoring, and the Department for Education will be carrying out some comparability studies so that they can see how each of the approved assessments compare to one another. But because we are a company that's very well known for its standardised assessments, we will be providing a range of other data that will help you track progress going forward, particularly if you use the standard age score and you use any other GL assessment assessments for the children when they're slightly older. That is a very, very good way of tracking progress, and we can talk a little bit more about that if that would be of interest. There will be a range of reports, and they will feature the DFE scale score, a range of standardised scores, and also some summary information. We have put together a narrative piece for the teacher and one for the parent, which suggests what the implications for teaching and learning might be that have come from the assessment. There's some diagnostic information, for example, looking at the language and communication and comparing expression with comprehension. So some things there where there might be some subtle differences within a child's responses that would be important for you to know. So this is it just gives you an idea here. This is the main information that will come through on the group report for teachers. So typically this would be a whole class or a whole year group. We can produce reports that would include several schools. We call those cluster reports, and they're very useful for local authorities or for clusters of schools wanting to look across the whole of their group. So here you can see in the second column the T-score, which is the scale score that we will be returning to the department. There's then an overall standard age score, so that's the standard age score for the whole of the assessment. You can then see a visual representation of that score for each child. We then have a Stay9 score, which is a simplified way of looking at a child's performance, and that has 9 as the highest score and 1 as the lowest. Then there's a group rank, and then we break that down and give that information again for literacy and language and then mathematics. So there's quite a bit of information in the group report. This is just the top bit of an individual report that goes to the teacher, and this is about one for every single student would be available. So this gives you the same information but just for one student, and then you can see there's a summary, and there would be a series of bullet pointed information that would make suggestions about how you might interpret those scores and what you might think about doing in the classroom for that particular student. So just before we hand over to Rhys, just to explain that we carried out a very, very substantial study last term in September and October. We assessed in all about 2,500 students across the whole of the UK. In terms of working for the DFE and their criteria, we had 50 schools in England and just under 1,600 children were assessed in schools in England, and 500 of those were reassessed to ensure reliability, and that's something we had to do with, we had to arrange reassessment with the same administrator and then some other children with a different administrator, and that was to make sure that within a short period of time the results would be very similar whether you did it again with the same administrator or a different administrator worked with the child. And so that was, it was a very, very big project. All of the assessments had to be carried out by half term, so we had about a 6-week window. Another very important criteria was that EAL pupils should be represented as they are nationally, and that means that the sample includes about 18% of children with English as an additional language. And I know that many of you will be interested in how children with SEND were included. Our selection of pupils was completely random, but we found it difficult to record children's SEND status because many of them had not been identified at the age of 4. So we took anecdotal feedback about how teachers included those children, what adaptation they took, and we will be working that into guidance that we put into a teacher manual that will go out with baseline when people use it in September. So that's what I wanted to say. I hope that gives you a good enough overview. It is very quick, but as Vicky says, there's more information on our website, and she will be sending out the link to the demo, so I would urge you to have a look at it. The demo is short, but it will give you a better idea of how the two tablets work together. And I think we're now going to hand over to Rhys.
Oh, hi there. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Well, as you know, I trialled the GL baseline assessment in September of last year. And today, really, I'm going to just tell you how I found it, how the children found using it, and then any sort of little difficulties that perhaps came up while we were doing it, during this trial, and then how we overcame them. I administered the assessment originally with 22 trial children in my cohort, and I have to say it ran pretty smoothly. There were 4 sections in the original trial, and each one took roughly 10 minutes, but there were actually a couple of sections that were faster than this, and numeracy was one of those. At first, I tried to do 2 sections per child, but this was too much for the children to take, and so eventually I decided, after sort of 2 or 3 children, I decided to do each section in turn with all the children, moving on to the next section, and so on. Each of the assessments were very self-explanatory. The voice function meant that actually I had very little talking to do, but there were times, I have to admit, that I wanted to step in and say things differently to the children, but of course, being the standardised test, it had to be done in this way, and so just reminding myself of that was something I had to do a few times. This, though, of course, meant that each child had exactly the same question, exactly the same way, in exactly the same format, and so they got to know it quite well. There were times that some of the children couldn't give an answer, and so I did actually step in, giving a bit more explanation, but even though I stepped in, they wouldn't have got an answer correctly anyway, so I felt that this wouldn't have made much of a difference at that point. As the assessment doesn't actually give answers to the children unless it's one of the test questions, I did find that some of the children were asking me were they right or were they wrong, and so I did take time to explain to the children at that point. First of all, saying that, oh, we'll find out later on, we'll talk about it later, but then the some children, of course, just need to know now, and so I used it as a teaching point, and then I also started putting some of these things into my class teaching to make it, after the test, to make it simple for the children to see. The first thing that I found was actually finding quiet space to do these assessments, quite tricky. Being a busy school, a big school of 420 pupils, it was tricky. But timetabling a space so everybody knew in the school that that was my space to do these assessments was essential. And I didn't really take that on board as much as I perhaps would have done after doing it to start with. There were also times when trying to link the 2 tablets didn't quite work, and that was actually down to our slow network at school. How we overcame this was we actually just used the 1 tablet occasionally if we couldn't get them to link properly. However, when I had these issues, I spoke with the tech team at GL Assessment, and I have never had a tech team be so quick to respond. They were fantastic. They were, really helpful in able to sort any of these issues out. And it reassured me, really, that if I had any other problems in the future, that they would get it quickly sorted for me. Another reason that I liked the GL assessment was because the children were actually coming up asking me when it was their turn. They were really keen to take part. Some of them were actually upset when I was saying that they weren't going to be doing it today, or actually they weren't on the list. And so I found that I actually had to come up with some other time that I could use the tablets with the children. But I just thought the fact that children want to do something, it must mean a lot. And so that was another fact that I thought this has got to be, quite a good assessment tool. The children actually enjoyed doing the assessments themselves. There were times that they were a little confused from whether needing to make a selection or when they had to give me a response, and there were times I had to say to them, oh, can you tell me now, rather than trying to tap the screen. But once we'd got past that, they found it quite self-explanatory themselves. The children were using the tablets really easily. I mean, majority of the children come in knowing how to use tablets nowadays, and actually it's us teaching them how to use a laptop or a desktop PC. So the fact that it was all based on tablet form was simple for me, it was simple for the children, and it meant actually I spent more time doing the assessments than having to worry about the technology that it was being used with, or papers faffing about when they go all missing or out of sync. So that was a really important factor for me, and knowing the trial was all tablet form made it something that I wanted to do. There were some of the pictures originally that were difficult to read, but as children struggle to see almost a 3D aspect, it's going to be difficult whether it's on tablet form or paper form, and it was just something that we had to tackle straight away in our class teachings, really, to kind of help those children, because I knew they would answer it correctly if they saw it physically in front of them, but on a 2D picture form it can be trickier. We did have one child that was on the trial list. They couldn't actually they couldn't access this assessment tool because they were a non-speaking English speaking child. They were also very stubborn, and so sat there sort of head down, and we couldn't actually get them to participate in this assessment. Now, because it was a trial, we then chose a different EAL child, and at this point they did start to access the assessment, but they found the voice tool quite tricky to use, and so because we had all the questions written down, I actually started reading the questions for this child, and that just helped them access the assessment tools. Also, because the questions were written down, it ensured that we were still doing it as a standardised test. There was one other child that we did have difficulty with, and he was a child with learning difficulties. He's not actually statemented, but he was pretty much tapping on the screen. Therefore, I knew that the results would probably throw up inaccuracies, but I made my own notes as I went through the assessment with him. There were times when he was correct, and so I jotted this down, and there were times he was just tapping. This did throw up problems when I got the results back, because I could see that actually the amount of questions that he in fact got correct didn't match the number that was recorded. But because I administered this test, I was able to see what was accurate and use my own judgment anyway. All in all, I have to say, for the trial, it was a little time-consuming to do with these children, but obviously just listening to you now saying that it's been shortened, I think that will definitely be a bonus. But the biggest thing for me was the fact that the children enjoyed doing it and wanted to do it, and this made me feel happier administering an assessment tool, which as EYFS people we're all a little bit reluctant to do, but they wanted to do it, they were happy to do it, and that was really